The Committee on Natural Resources, Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, and the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development will come to order. Without objection, the chair are authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. The subcommittees are meeting today to hear testimony on enhancing educational outcomes in Indian country post-secondary education at the Bureau of Indian Education. Under House Natural Resources Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements are limited to the chairman and ranking member. For the purpose of this joint hearing, that will also be extended to the chairman and ranking member of the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development, of the Committee on Education and Workforce, as well as the full committee chair and ranking member of each committee. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all the other members' statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with House Natural Resources Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the following members be allowed to sit and participate in today's hearing. The gentleman from California, Mr. Lamalfa. The gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann. The gentleman from Montana, Mr. Dowling. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for my opening statement. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see it's one of those beautiful days. I would like to once again thank the House Committee on Education and Workforce and Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development for being here today for this joint hearing. I'd also like to thank our witness, Mr. Scott Davis, who himself is a Haskell alumni, for joining us. Thank you very much. Last year, our subcommittee convened a historic joint hearing following numerous reports of wrongdoing at Haskell Indian Nations University. That hearing served as an opportunity for both sides of the aisle to come together and agree that more had to be done to better serve the students of Haskell and all tribal schools, quite frankly. As Congress and a nation, we must have a trust responsibility. We have a trust responsibility to our tribal nations that cannot be pushed aside. With the Trump administration, we are in a new chapter. And in today's hearing, we will discuss how we can better serve our tribal students with a particular focus on post-secondary education. Today's hearing will not just focus on Haskell. The Bureau of Indian Education, or BIE, runs another post-secondary institution, the Southwest Indian Polytechnic Institute, also known as SIPI. Both schools face a range of serious issues on their campuses, including criminal misconduct, below average graduation rates, large deferred maintenance backlogs, and more. Our tribal students deserve better. Both institutions have suffered from leadership and management issues. For example, there have been multiple instances of Haskell failing to complete the legally required background checks for their staff. According to a former Haskell president, at least 3 boards of Regent members failed their background checks, one of whom was a convicted felon. In January of this year, an ex-Haskell Board of Regents member was banished from his tribe after pleading guilty to serious felonies, including attempted homicide, among other crimes. The school also lost its 9th president in 8 years this May, a change in leadership that aligned with the change in accreditation in the spring. This subcommittee held a hearing in February highlighting how BIE is unable to effectively manage deferred maintenance at their elementary and post-secondary schools. This issue is seen across campuses, both Haskell and SIPI. In 2021, the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Facilities, Property, and Safety Management released a faculty condition index for the BIE schools, which found that Haskell and SIPI's campuses are in poor condition due to the deferred maintenance backlog. A 2023 faculty condition assessment of Haskell found that 27 of the school's 36 buildings were in severe condition and in need of immediate replacement. At the start of the 2024-2025 academic year, Haskell turned away newly enrolled students because they lacked the necessary housing for them to stay on campus. SIPI has indicated their poor campus conditions are to blame for the decline in enrollment. In addition to poor facilities, both schools have low graduation rates and issues with their academic accreditation. In 2023, SIPI's graduation rate was a mere 9%. Wow. Earlier this year, the Higher Learning Commission changed Haskell's accreditation rating to continued accreditation with monitoring. This indicates concerns regarding the institution's compliance with accreditation requirements. Back in 2010, SIPI lost their accreditation due to testing and record-keeping issues, but their accreditation status was returned in 2014 and reaffirmed in 2018. While this indicates an improvement for SIPI, anything other than full accreditation for our university run by federal employees is inexcusable. Beyond the leadership, on May 5th, 2025, the Office of the Inspector General released a summary of an investigation which found that a BIE employee sexually harassed student athletes on the Haskell women's basketball team. According to the report, the employee made cruel jokes and sexual comments and had non-consensual contact with a student. This behavior deterred some student athletes from going to the athletic training room to receive treatment. And that employee's supervisor and other staff knew about it and failed to report it. Worse yet, this employee had been investigated by BAE a decade before for similar complaints from an intern who was working at Haskell while attending the University of Kansas. It's past time for real and long-lasting changes at these schools. Despite of all the known issues at Haskell and Mississippi, which have gone on for far too long, I believe that everyone in this room feels that the tribal students deserve better. I look forward to working with my colleagues as well as the Trump administration and Secretary Burgum to put tribal students first and ensure that we can not only fulfill these trust responsibilities, but also empower these institutions with the input of tribes to be the best versions of themselves. Thank you. I now recognize Ranking Member Dexter for her opening statement. Yeah, let me see.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Davis, for joining us today. I also want to welcome my colleagues from the Educational and the Workforce Committee Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development, and thank them for their ongoing leadership on this topic. Tribal colleges advance tribal sovereignty and self-determination while providing culturally competent education for Native students. We have a treaty-mandated obligation to support these institutions and ensure that meaningful effort and investment is being made to offer exceptional learning opportunities. The Bureau of Indian Education operates 2 post-secondary schools, as you have heard, Haskell Indian Nations University and Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute, known as SIPI from here on in, or also already known. They are cornerstones of tribal education and represent an important pathway for Native students from all over the country. In fact, each of us here on the dais probably represent alumni of Haskell and SIPI. At this subcommittee's recent hearing on tribal K-12 education exposed the dire state of infrastructure needs at tribal schools. School residential halls, classrooms, and campus facilities have crumbling infrastructure, aging sewer and HVAC systems, and extensive weather damage. Underfunding has been identified as a major problem. Not the only problem, but certainly the biggest one. The same is true for post-secondary institutions. Haskell alone faces a $90 million maintenance backlog, and the biggest driver of this crisis is clear: chronic systemic underfunding. Now, the Trump administration has proposed to make a bad situation much worse. Trump's budget would cut BIE education construction funding by 80% and cut tribal post-secondary programs by 90%. That's on top of reckless staffing cuts from haphazard DOGE firings and buyouts. These are not just budget decisions, they are attacks on tribal education, and together they could cause irreparable damage to the very institutions we are supposed to be here to support. It is pointless to have a discussion today about whether BIE is adequately tracking its building maintenance if there's no money and no staff to do the tracking. At the same time, I am encouraged by this committee's ongoing bipartisan investigation into Haskell, suggesting that both sides care enough to protect it. I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will work with me on a letter to appropriators asking for the funding to keep the school intact while we pursue real reform, because Haskell students deserve better. Incidents including sexual harassment, bullying, retaliation, and other symptoms of institutional failure rest at the feet of all levels of leadership. Just last month, the Haskell president resigned abruptly after a routine but extensive accreditation process. I am grateful for the leadership of my colleague, Representative Emily Randall, for securing a commitment during the reconciliation markup for this committee to work with the Government Accountability Office in a bipartisan way to provide guidance on the reforms we should consider at Haskell. It's also important to note that tribes in Kansas appear to be coalescing behind a proposal to remove BIE from Haskell's operation. We must listen to tribal communities if we hope to serve Haskell students. I hope we can have that conversation soon, because I am concerned that the proposal could make Haskell more vulnerable, not less. Yet another proposal could make Haskell and SIPI more vulnerable is the reauthorization of the Great American Outdoors Act, or GOA. When it was signed into law in 2020, it provided $95 million for BIE-run schools. Haskell and SIPI were eligible to get some of that funding, though they did not receive any. If Haskell and SIPI lose foundational funding because of the budget cuts proposed by Republicans, the GOA funding will be crucial. When this committee reauthorizes GOA, tribal schools must continue to remain eligible for those funds. As we consider various reforms at BIE schools, I hope we can center our trust and treaty obligations. We can't fix a problem caused mostly by underfunding, by acceleration of underfunding. I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle care about Haskell and SIPI, and I'm grateful we can work together on this. There's a lot we agree on. None of it will matter if Haskell takes a 90% budget cut or its federal funding is eliminated entirely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. I also want to wave the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansberry, the gentlelady from Washington, Ms. Randall, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Gray, onto the committee. Without objection, so ordered. I now want to recognize the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development Chairman, Mr. Owens, for his opening testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Gozer, and good morning, everyone. As Chairman of the Higher Education and Workforce Subcommittee, it is my privilege to join you and others in hosting this very important hearing, one in which we'll hear about the status of the post-secondary education provided by BIE for Native Americans. I look forward to hearing our witness, Mr. Scott Davis, currently carrying out the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Bureau of Indian Affairs. Just a little bit, I'm getting an echo. I'm a little close. Okay, all right. Almost 1 year ago, in another joint hearing by these subcommittees, we heard about the dysfunction of BIE, mismanagement, fraud, nepotism, the failure to investigate complaints, a failure to address sexual harassment, and a long-time failure to exercise proper oversight of the Haskell Indian Nations University. In addition to these failures, we're again going to discuss, as in the past, the inability of BIE to properly steward its buildings and campuses in educating Native American students. It's not just stewardship of property, there's also recurring instances of sexual harassment at Haskell Indian Nations University that is particularly troubling, and the lack of strong response by its leaders. And it doesn't stop there. More broadly, BIE has failed to meet the mark, has failed to create and instill in a culture of accountability in the Bureau and its schools. Southwestern Indian Polytech Institute is similar. Senior officials there have also demonstrated a lack of leadership. A 2018 sexual harassment investigation by the Inspector General revealed that neither BIE nor Southwestern had a policy prohibiting sexual relationship between faculty and students. Obviously, that leaves a lot of Native American females at risk. All these incidents are problematic, and we need solutions. I'm hopeful for that the testimony of Mrs. Davis will include solutions that will get BIE, Haskell, and Southwestern on the path to long-term success. Our students deserve no less. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Utah. I now recognize the Subcommittee on Higher Education, Workforce Development, Ranking Member Adams for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd also like to thank Chairman Gosar and Ranking Member Dexter, as well as the witness for being here today. Last summer, we held a similar joint hearing regarding post-secondary education under the Bureau of Indian Education. That hearing primarily focused on Haskell University, and so I'm grateful for the opportunity to revisit that issue. Let me begin by acknowledging the United States' shameful history of mistreating and forcibly assimilating Native people. Our country has spent many decades and worked across many administrations in an attempt to rectify a fraction of these injustices and to do what we can to improve the lives of Native people today by ensuring educational and economic opportunity in these communities. Haskell Indian Nations University and Southwestern Indian Polytech University represent, among other things, a promise on behalf of Congress to indigenous communities across the country. For example, through Title III of the Higher Education Act of 1965, Congress committed to supporting quality tribal colleges and universities. These tribal colleges were meant to be safe spaces for Native students to receive a quality, affordable education while embracing and uplifting their culture. That's a vision worth striving for, and that goal should be the focal point of our conversations today. Unfortunately, the U.S. government has consistently fallen short of this goal and has never fully kept its promise to appropriately fund these schools. Over the years, these schools have gone neglected and underfunded. And one impact of this treatment has been the infrastructure challenges and the maintenance backlogs that these schools have experienced. Without additional resources, these schools cannot address issues facing their physical structures, such as leaking roofs and plumbing issues, electrical issues, and other infrastructure problems. And unfortunately, these are not the only problems we've heard of. At Haskell University, we've heard of instances of abuse, corruption, scandal, all of which limit students' ability to learn safely and succeed. Specifically, we've heard allegations of the Bureau of Indian Education itself failed to provide leadership, transparency, accountability, and management despite reports of a hostile campus environment rife with issues such as academic fraud, nepotism, and tragically, in some cases, sexual misconduct and abuse. In fact, in May, the Department of Interior's Office of Inspector General found that the BIE employees sexually harassed student athletes on then women's basketball team. The students and faculty of these schools deserve better, and the Native communities that they serve deserve to have the promise of opportunity fulfilled. The answer to these issues is not to abandon Haskell and its community. It's critical that the school, along with SIPI and their students, get the support that they need. And this includes providing support and funding so that they can too live up to the standards that their communities deserve. And this is why we need the administration to take steps to help these schools. However, from what we've seen so far, they've done the opposite. In February, the Trump administration fired a significant number of staff members from the Bureau of Indian Education, some of them working at Haskell and SIPI, only to be forced to rehire them. And so let me be clear. These firings accomplished nothing but to add instability and uncertainty to these schools. Further, the administration's FY26 funding request did not indicate any intent to increase support at these schools through the Bureau of Indian Education's budget. In fact, the president's budget request was to cut funding by almost 90%. So in light of all of this, at this hearing, I would like to hear how the Trump administration plans to provide support for these institutions and to help make improvements where needed. Congress has a responsibility to ensure that the students at these schools receive a high-quality education in a safe environment that's conducive to celebrating and uplifting Native culture. As a 40-year retired professor, I believe that student success is important. Far too long, the federal government has neglected that duty, and it's time to right past wrongs, get these schools back on track for the sake of the next generation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for her comments. I now recognize the House Education and Workforce Full Committee Chairman, Mr. Wahlberg, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Gosar. Let me first extend my thanks to you for initiating this hearing, and also thanks to Subcommittee Chairman Owens, who has faithfully led our Higher Education and Workforce Development Subcommittee in the 118th and now the 119th Congress. He's repeatedly talked about how education is the key to unlocking the American dream. And of course, I lend my hearty amen to that. This is the second time our subcommittees have come together to hear the reoccurring operational challenges of the Bureau of Indian Education. Over and over, we've read reports and heard testimonies by GAO, the Inspector General, and others about BIE's poor management of its K-12 and post-secondary schools and inability to exercise meaningful oversight of Haskell Indian Nations University. It's well documented. The problem at Haskell are apparent. The failure to maintain a safe and secure learning environment for students, misconduct by students and staff, including sexual harassment that has often gone unaddressed, bullying, nepotism, employee favoritism, and the list goes on. Within the last few weeks, we learned of the Inspector General's report about the sexual harassment of students on Haskell's women's basketball team, the failure of a supervisor to report the harassment, and potential violations of Kansas state law involving athletic trainers. More broadly, as I have observed from my role as chairman of the Education and Workforce Committee, we continue to investigate campus anti-Semitism, advocate for changes in the student loan program through reconciliation, and dealing with malign foreign influence by China at our colleges and universities. I'm grateful that we're making strides on these fronts, and they must continue. At the same time, we must do more to ensure Native American students are provided a safe and secure environment to learn at Haskell, and that BIE, once and for all, rises to the occasion. I look forward to working with President Trump and his team to hear their solutions for BIE and Haskell. And Mr. Davis, I certainly look forward to your testimony. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the House and Natural Resources Full Committee Ranking Member, Mr. Huffman, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am glad that we're here talking on a bipartisan basis about these important institutions, Haskell and SIPI. Obviously, they have a very important mission. They are pillars in the tribal education community, bulwarks against poverty, and they create opportunities for tribes throughout the country. And a lot has been said about the problems at Haskell. Other members have covered it fully. I don't disagree with any of those characterizations. It's a big problem, and we need to tackle it in a serious and bipartisan way. But it is worth noting that we have a lot greater visibility into Haskell and all of these issues because they're run by the federal government. We have better mechanisms for accountability and reform because these schools are run by the federal government. Now, the problems at Haskell are complex. There are multiple causes, but there's a single cause that stands out as eclipsing perhaps all of the others, and that is loss of funding. The President's proposed budget for 2026 cuts funding for Haskell and SIPI by almost 90%. We have to talk about that. That is essential context for these problems that we say we care about in a bipartisan way. The budget for education construction at BIE would be cut by 80%. So if you think we had a serious problem with the maintenance backlog before, imagine adding an 80% cut to that BIE education construction account on top of all of that. And of course, all of this should be a call to action for us to reauthorize the Great American Outdoors Act in a way that ensures that BIE and institutions like Haskell and SIPI continue to get critical funding from that legislation. There's one more thing that we really can't forget as part of this conversation, and that's the attacks by Elon Musk's Doge. In February, nearly 25% of staff members at Haskell and SIPI were just fired, including instructors, maintenance workers, and other support staff. Dozens of courses at both schools lost their instructors. School dorms were overrun with garbage. Students reported undrinkable brown water. Dining halls failed to adequately feed students, and widespread power outages hampered students' ability to study. So some campus staff have been rehired, thankfully, but employees at BIE's central and regional offices were also fired and given buyouts, and frankly, it has just led to chaos that is not good for either of these institutions. We cannot deprive an institution of resources and expect it to survive, let alone to help its students thrive. So I'm interested in working across the aisle with my Republican colleagues on confronting the serious problems at Haskell and SIPI. I will do that with any member of Congress, but I'm not interested in using these problems as a pretext for further gutting BIE or spinning off these institutions in a way that could leave them orphaned and without federal funding and accountability. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman from California. Now the full committee chairman, Westerman, is recognized. He's been sitting patiently.
Thank you, Chairman Gosar, and also want to extend a thank you to Chairman Wahlberg for his cooperation on this issue and for helping us coordinate this joint hearing, and Chairman Owens for your work on this critical issue. And I'm pleased that we're here meeting again to talk about the issues that students are continuing to face at BIE's post-secondary institutions. Since our 2024 hearing, I have had the privilege of working with former Chairwoman Fox, along with now Chairman Wahlberg, as well as my colleagues across the aisle, to look at ways we can improve educational outcomes for tribal students attending these schools. And this is a bipartisan issue. It's something that we should work together on, and it's something that we should fix as soon as possible. But following our hearing last Congress, our committee took decisive action to further address ongoing issues at Haskell. However, our efforts were stonewalled by DOI and the previous administration. The Department of the Interior, under its previous leadership, did not provide proper access to a 2022 BIE report or its exhibits as promised, despite a bipartisan request for review. Because of this, our teams left with more questions than answers, and follow-up requests for access went unanswered. Our committees also have worked to address the lack of background checks for members of the Haskell Board of Regents. Since our last hearing, a former member of the Haskell Board of Regents pled guilty to a number of very serious felonies and was banished by his tribe. Because these board members have an active role on campus, background checks are an important tool in ensuring the ongoing safety of enrolled students. As has been mentioned, reports of sexual harassment continue to create an unsafe environment for students at Haskell. On May 5th, the Department of the Interior Inspector General's Office released a report summary which found that a BIE employee sexually harassed members of the Haskell women's basketball team and that the supervisors and the staff did nothing about it. After reviewing this report, I'm further appalled. This same individual was reported by another student intern nearly a decade ago for similar behavior, investigated by the BIE, yet no action was taken. This is not the time for more investigation. This is the time for action. The overall condition at BIE schools continues to be unacceptable. The fact that enrolled students were turned away from Haskell at the start of the 2024-2025 academic year because of a lack of housing is unacceptable. The fact that students at Haskell and SIPI are living in unsafe conditions on their campuses is not only unacceptable, but it's also appalling. It's incredibly disheartening and concerning that the BIE has failed to properly educate and foster a healthy learning environment for our tribal students. We have trust obligations to our tribes, and part of those trust obligations come from the Department of Interior and BIE. But because of the issues we have identified at Haskell and SIPI, Congress has had to step in where BIE and the department previously failed to provide proper oversight. Since the previous administration stonewalled Congress, we were limited in our ability to effectively provide oversight of BIE, and with the issues we identified, it is deeply concerning and troubling to me that all of our requests were ignored by the former Secretary of the Interior. We now have the opportunity to reset and refocus. I think that Dr. Gosar said it best during our February hearing when he said that America first means putting tribes first. I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses today who understand, as has already been said, Mr. Davis is a graduate of Haskell. In this new era, I look forward to exploring how Congress can work together with tribes and the Trump administration to ensure that Haskell and SIPI do not return to business as usual at the expense of their students. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Westerman. I will now introduce our witness. Mr. Scott Davis, Senior Advisor to the Secretary, exercising the delegated authority of the Assistant Secretary, Indian Affairs, Bureau of Indian Affairs, U.S. Department of Interior, Washington, D.C. Let me remind you that the witness that under the committee rules, you will limit your statements to about 5 minutes. Just know that the entire statement is already part of the record. To begin your testimony, make sure you push to the green light so that it's already on. When you see it getting yellow, start wrapping it up, and if it gets red, please stop. I now recognize you, Mr. Davis, for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I want to thank you, Chairman, members of the committee, for this opportunity, and probably most importantly, the attention. But first of all, I just want to greet you all in my own way, in my tongue. Saha matakiape apetekile, chante washte chizinapelo, oshkate tau mischek hiwapitin, himachape, Standing Rock, Turlaman, Oyate, Davis, Buffalo Boy, Pleats, Tayoshpai. Good day, everybody. I greet you all with a warm, heartfelt handshake here. It's a pleasure and an honor here to be in front of you today to talk about a very, very important topic that's very personal to me for a number of reasons. One, being higher education. Two, it's my alma mater in Haskell. So with that, Mr. Chairman, as you alluded to, I'm a Haskell graduate. Very proud of that. Back in the 80s, 90s, I come from a long line of graduates from Haskell, including my mother, who I think is watching today, hopefully proudly. I have certainly a lot of uncles and relatives I've graduated over the years, back in years ago, and even today too. So a long history with Haskell in higher education. My father, Dr. Jim Davis, who was a college president, passed away this January. Still get emotional with that. Was a college president and was a board of trustee, was a regent at one time at Haskell back in the 90s. So we have a long, very strong ties to Haskell. I was also went to Haskell as an athlete back in the day, many pounds ago, I'll say, as a track and marathon runner, in which I was very fortunate to be an All-American back in 1988 for the marathon championship team. So that history of Haskell with its tradition of education, and also the history of Billy Mills and Jim Thorpe is probably one of the big reasons why I went there, because I wanted to be an Olympian at one time. But you know, those are the things I aspired to be. But here I am today. But these schools, along with the 574 tribes across Indian country, across America, all have our unique way of educating our tribal students. Some have a number of BIE schools that we lead. Also, a number of TCUs, tribal colleges that are out throughout Indian country. Their existence and their quality of education provided have a direct and immediate impact for all future of Native Americans and sovereignty for all tribal communities. President Trump, Secretary Burgum, and my office leadership are dedicated to providing educational choice to our students to help prepare them to enter the workforce and lead successful lives in the next generation of tribal leaders. BIA remains focused on ensuring access to high-quality cultural relevant education that reflects the diverse needs and priorities of Indian students and tribal communities. Ongoing investments are being made in critical areas such as school infrastructure, instructional quality, and student support services. We also remain committed to maintaining the educational stability in tribal communities and ensuring alignment with local needs. We also continue to engage in regulatory tribal leaders meetings, school board meetings, community members to guide us to investment decisions and identify opportunities for collaboration. With the resources entrusted by my agency and by Congress, we will continue advancing initiatives effectively and efficiently that promote academic excellence while honoring the cultural identities of our Native American students. So again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity, and more importantly, the attention. It's kind of, I would say, unfortunate that you're into this second hearing since last year addressing, these challenges. I certainly hope it's the last one. I hope we don't have to, reconvene again here next year, because I'm fully committed through my leadership, through my experience with higher ed, working for a tribal college for 8 years, being an adjunct instructor, even starting my career as a K-8 teacher aide and coach back in the 90s, and growing up in the environment of higher education and education. So I'm very committed to seeing this through. Very concerning. I'm very appalled, like most of you. very upset personally of what I've been reading, what I've been hearing about. But I'm really looking forward to working with you and finding a different way, a reset button of how we can make Haskell and our other educational settings more beneficial to my relatives throughout the country. So those are my opening comments, Mr. Chairman. I'll stand for any questions or comments at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis, for your comments. I'm not going to recognize members on the dais for their questions. I'm first going to go to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Burgess, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Davis, I look forward to working with you. I also come from a long line of educators. My dad was a college professor for 40 years. Mom was a high school teacher. I look forward to you adding your tenacity, your grit as a former athlete, to your love of education, and we're going to right this ship for sure. I thought I'd start off. Last night I just decided to read the mission statement for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In the last sentence it says this: promoting tribal self-determination and self-governance. And how you get there is through education, through BIE. Well, let me tell you what the status is of this community. It is the actual worst than any community in our country. It is number one in suicide, number one in lowest life expectancy, number one in violence and victimization, number one in alcohol abuse, number one in unemployment, number one in school dropout, now shares with the black community sex trafficking of girls. Evil hides in darkness. Evil hides behind invisible victims. Having the sovereignty state nation status does not allow anyone to keep these good Americans from achieving the American dream. And unfortunately, that's been happening way too long. I'm looking forward to, oh, by the way, let me just say this real quickly. And I might sound like a broken record, but I grew up at a time when I saw my community, my black community, lead our country in the growth of middle class, men matriculating from college, men committed to marriage, and percentage of entrepreneurs, because we had vision, we had education, and we had a desire to really command respect. It was not the white supremacists that got us. It was black elitists, people who looked like me, who decided that their success, their prominence, their profitability was more important than our race. And I think we need to get back to merit in this community. We need to bring that to the front, and I look forward to you doing that, because there are people who care about the Native American population. And it's time that we start making them first and not acting as if they're invisible to the rest of our country because of the status that was given them many, many years ago. Ms. Davis, a May 2025 Inspector General report documents reported incidents of sexual harassment of some of the members of the Haskell women's basketball team by one of its athletic trainers. Since taking on the role of Assistant Secretary, what have you done to address the findings of this report? And have you directed Haskell or BIE to develop a plan of action to address these findings?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mr. Owens, yeah, thank you. I echo your sentiments and your background on how you were raised. I totally agree with that as well. I know I've read most of the reports, not totally in depth. I'm still reading a lot of the reports. Very concerning, very appalled, very, very upsetting. Obviously, I can't comment on the investigation itself, can't do that. But I can assure you, through our leadership, through my action, all these things will be addressed, whether it's the background checks, the allegation of sexual abuse, all the things that are included in those reports will all be addressed immediately as we speak.
Okay. And I know you're just kind of getting sea legs on this, but is there any latest status on the Inspector General's referral of the Kansas state authorities for any potential violations of the licensing regulations governing athletic trainers? Is there any updates on that at all?
Yeah, Mr. Owens, a member of the committee, I'm not certain on that one. I haven't read that one. I'm aware of it as of yesterday, but I'm not aware of the one that relates to the state of Kansas on that one, sir.
Well, I'm gonna pass on in a minute. I'm excited at the fact that we have a new sheriff in town. All Americans count in this country. Those who have been hidden in the past are no longer be hidden. And I look forward to our this committee really taking advantage of what we have going on and make sure that we give every child a chance to live the American dream. So thank you, and I look forward to working with you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Gentleman recognizes the ranking member for the committee, Ms. Dr. Dexter, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Davis, it's clear, and I appreciate how much you care about our tribal schools and your dedication to them and the students you serve. Thank you for that. In your opinion, does the president's proposed budget for BIE indicate that this administration also cares about tribal students in schools?
I'm sorry, I can't see your tag here, madam, yeah, respectively, in the president's budget, for 2026 provides resources for BI's core mission to support Bureau-operated and tribally controlled primary and secondary schools along Haskell Indian Nations University and SIPI. BI budget request of $9 million and change in 2026 to continue support for Indian education programs, including formula funding, operations and maintenance funding for elementary and secondary schools, and support for secondary programs. The request prioritizes programs that directly support educational services to Indian children at BIE-funded schools. Included in the total BIE budget is $22 million to specifically operations at both SIPI and Haskell. These funds ensure that BIE and operated post-secondary institutions are able to continue services delivery to support all tribes.
So, Mr. Davis, the president's budget proposes a 90% cut from BIE post-secondary programs like Haskell and SIPI, and an 80% cut to the BIE education construction. Do you think that this budget is a serious effort to address infrastructure concerns at our tribal colleges?
Well, madam, I know this is, again, I think a unique time for Haskell, a unique time for in the country, a unique time for all of BIA in general, as we look at resetting some buttons of the path forward, whether it's BIA services in general throughout the country or higher education institutions like Haskell and SIPI, looking at different unique, innovative ways in how we fundraise or provide funding for sources. I look at my own career back at United Tribes Technical College back in 2008, 2007, where I was a development officer, and we got a lot of federal funding at that time. Also, I was hired to look at other funding opportunities. We developed a foundation. I'm not certain if Haskell has a foundation or not, but maybe that's one thing that we should look at collectively. But ultimately, trying to give Haskell more areas of funding potential versus kind of being dependent upon the federal dollar. But again, looking forward to working with you, Congress, my office, the Interior Office, and how we can look at more innovative ways for funding mechanisms for Haskell.
No, and I appreciate that. I mean, I understand that you are looking at other options and, at what is a shortfall for what is needed at Haskell and SIPI. I guess I'm going to move on because I think it's clear that you're in a difficult situation and you're looking at other options to make sure you have the resources you need. But do you believe the current infrastructure at BIE-run colleges fosters a high-quality academic environment?
Yeah, great question again, too. I appreciate that. I was very, I'll say privileged, very honored, very humbled to be asked to be one of the commencement speakers about a month ago for graduation. I was just tickled, excited, very, very nervous because I haven't been back to my alma mater in like 30 years. And so entering the campus, certainly a lot has changed. A lot hasn't changed. So during my two-day visit there, obviously visited the faculty, the staff, the students, took a lot of time just to have one-on-one meetings and so forth, and took a long look at my old dorm. I was a dorm president back then, and it needs some help. My mom's dorm, I took a picture of it, old Pocahontas Hall. I said, look, Mom, look at your dorm, it's still there, needs some help. So these are things, when you have an iconic historical campus like Haskell and SIPI, it obviously is going to be wear and tear, deferred maintenance. Those are things that I think collectively working together, we can look at those things and how we can get those things up to par for safety and a good learning environment for our students across any country.
So I have a few other questions, but to be in order, I guess I'll yield back and see if we have an opportunity later. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Davis.
I now acknowledge the chairman for the full committee, Mr. Westerman from Arkansas, for his first 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Gosar, and thank you, Mr. Davis, for your testimony and for being here today. As I mentioned earlier, we pretty much got stonewalled by the previous administration when we asked for information following our hearings last Congress. And my first question to you will be, will you commit to working with Congress to address the issues at Haskell and SIPI?
Absolutely, sir.
I'm pleased to hear that we have that agreement, and that the department will work with us to help the students at Haskell and SIPI. From the issues that you've identified, what do you see as the greatest threats facing students at these institutions?
Great question. Appreciate the question. I think some of those things that I'll just see even as a parent, when my wife and I went down for graduation together for, obviously a special moment for me personally, we thought of our daughters, who's a freshman in college right now and a graduating senior, and we thought as parents, like, would this be a great place for our daughters to come here? And my wife, who is kind of the mama bear of our family, and what she says kind of goes sometimes in my family. She said, yeah, this would be a great place for our daughters to come and learn because of the interaction with the families that were there during graduation, the alumni. I felt very, very, very secure. But I think the thing that maybe is a challenge is sometimes the uncertainty, there's a pending legislation through your hallways here of a potential bill that's being introduced. That's great. What does that bill look like? Don't know. Again, these are the things that we want to help you with on what that congressional bill would look like that would benefit Haskell for the long term, whether that's funding, infrastructure, governance, all those things, all the above. But I think just the one challenge that I would feel as a parent, as an alumni, would be just the certainty or the uncertainty that's going on right now. A lot of questions, that are out there pending, and rightly so. These questions are concern for me, but I'm in a good position and very committed, through my leadership and through my experience to help see this through. Through your help, again, through my leadership, my experience, in the benefit of how Haskell could be a premier institution in the country.
Yeah, it sounds like we live in similar families, and I've found that Mama Bear's usually right as well. What administrative issues do Haskell and SIPI face that tribal colleges and universities don't face?
Well, working for a tribal college for about 8 years, and my dad being a president for one for 12 years, I was very fortunate to really hone in on how do you govern or administer a tribal college, and there's challenges. And I tell you, tribal colleges across our country are very unique in how they administer their funds, where they get their funds from, whether it's, through these hallways or private funds or foundations or private partnerships with private sector. But they do amazing jobs across in the country on how we obtain and sustain federal funding and other funding sources. So these are the unique things, I think, as far as a business model goes, that other colleges should be looking at. But the bottom line for our colleges is affordability. That's one reason I went to Haskell, because it was affordable. My parents did well here and there, but, it was very, very affordable. So if you look at across all of the country, the TCUs that we call, they're very affordable, and they fit home. They fit me as a Lakota, as a Anishinaabe man, because they provide a more of a cultural focus of who I am as a Native American. So those things are really important to me as a Native American man, that I kind of fit home. Eventually you get your 2 years done, or you transfer, which I did, finish off my 2 years, graduate school and so forth. But again, I really applaud what tribal colleges are doing, Haskell and SIPI, and how they fund things and ultimately provide education settings for students across the country.
Yeah. So there's been some discussion about the Great American Outdoors Act, which I hope we can work together to reauthorize that. We're coming up on the 5th year of that piece of legislation. And although Congress created that program, no funds were utilized by Haskell or SIPI under the previous administration. How does this administration plan to tackle the crumbling infrastructure at the two institutions using GAOA funding?
Another great question, sir. I think that's one thing that, Secretary Burgum and I, who did a lot of work when he was governor, his 8 years at the state. I worked for him for 6. You know, when we worked with the tribal colleges back home, is trying to be innovative ways of funding. You know, we legislated a lot of state dollars to tribal colleges back home, you know, through workforce development. As we know, across America, we all need good jobs, and where are we going to get good jobs from, you know, educational settings, graduates, you know, whether it's nursing, you know, truck driving, sometimes oil services, energy services, on and on. But tribal colleges do a great job of preparing our students for the next level. But I think, you know, being innovative with those programs through that funding source, and I'm not really privy to how that works through that funding source, but looking at those ways with you, with my help, of looking at different funding pots, funding buckets, and how we can sustain and long-term fund, you know, tribal colleges, SIPI, and Haskell in the long term.
Out of time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from California, Mr. Don Desaigne, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Davis, thank you for telling us the story of you going back to your college days. Let me talk a little bit about the Bureau's involvement in accreditation. You are involved. This provides for a level of oversight, both financially and career development, and making sure that all the things you've talked about actually are realized by students. So how is the Bureau involved with accreditation of the schools?
Yeah, very good question, sir. Yeah, accreditation. I've never been directly involved in accreditation, but I know a little bit or enough to understand it. But you know, I go back to governance. Whether you're the president, vice president, the dean, your board of regents, you know, I also served as on a board of a college back home. So decisions is very important. How you govern your school system, and that all relates to the higher education accreditation. So obviously there's checks and balances that every higher education institution across America, including our TCUs, have to follow, and making sure that those are followed with transparency, with good standing, and so forth too. So from my seat, I'm gonna watch it very intensely. I rarely do I micromanage, but I see myself micromanaging a lot of these processes from start till finish here in the coming years. So I'm going to be very, very involved in that accreditation process, to answer your question.
And one of the challenges in California that we've faced is because of the diversity in our UC and CSU and community college districts is making sure there's culturally competent staff, administrators, particularly teachers. And how are we doing, as far as you know, on that aspect of making sure that the young people who go through these schools are using their knowledge and their unique perspective to make sure that young people in this environment feel like they are being listened to without any kind of biases, but an appreciation of continuing the cultural benefits that
Absolutely.
we get from these young people?
Absolutely. You know, I think I look back at my mom, you know, who went to dental school there back in the day, and, you know, there's still a big need for, you know, healthcare in the country, and Haskell was, and I hope, you know, maybe through this process again, we can elevate Haskell as another healthcare academia for dental or other healthcare services for in the country. But back then, predominantly a lot of those teachers back then were non-native, you know. Fast track now, you know, to when I was at school back in the 80s, you know, probably 99% of my teachers were native. You know, they were probably alumni, and my coaches were all native, and they're from all over the country. So I felt at home, I felt secure, and when I felt that way, I achieved. I did well. Right. You know, my grades weren't the best at times, like most kids, but I performed well with academics and my athletics, you know, because I felt at home. So that obviously continues, you know, and that's a nice thing about, you know, when you graduate from Haskell or TCU, you know, you're taught to come back and help your community and give back to your tribal people, you know, as a teacher or a coach or what have you. So
That's terrific. Well, hopefully stay engaged in development, as you just articulated how important that is for us as a country, that we get the value of that perspective for the whole country, but we preserve that heritage as well. So, well spoken. I want to ask you a question about Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute and its efforts to broaden and get more young people into STEM. Again, in Northern California, where I'm from, we put a lot of effort into this. Sort of the curve has changed a little bit, particularly on the technology side and employment, but on engineering, as a member of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, it's a constant challenge to get enough engineers, and specifically back to the previous question, engineers that represent America in a diverse perspective. So the efforts at CIPI to get more young people to go into STEM programs, can you comment on that and your involvement?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in STEM. I'm a big believer in Polytech. I know we have a couple of those institutions back home in Bismarck. United Tribes is one of those. You know, I've yet to make my rounds to SIPI. You know, like I visited Haskell, so it's definitely on my high priority list is to visit. You know, for me personally, I have to really see and feel. You know, when I talk to the president, the leadership, the students, and just the environment of the buildings and infrastructure, and most importantly, the programming. You know, of what SIPI is consists of. So those things I'm going to be looking forward to here in the very, very near future.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I've got 2 seconds left, so I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you. I don't want you to take offense, but in one of the themes of our education committee this year and last year, well, one of the themes of our education committee is that perhaps too many people are going to college and not getting a skills-based education, which could lead to more job security and a higher salary. Say with regard to Haskell, what are the majors there that are most common among kids graduating from Haskell?
Great question. I know I should know this by heart now because we were going over these things with my daughters of what they wanted to be. I know one, they have a very robust environmental science program there. I know they have areas of athletic training there. I know there's another one, and obviously a business degree and so forth, a number of two-year degrees as well, if you want to just get your associates like I did. But I know the number of those degree programs have really flourished over the years. There's been increases. I would say enrollment has increased over 30%. I know they had a record graduation when I was there, around 161 graduates, which was a big turnout. Good to see, but for good reasons, contrary to what we're experienced here in the past with some of these reports and very disturbing news. Haskell's growing. Haskell's growing, you know, and it's growing in a good way. But I think again, it's important. What we're doing here today is making sure that that's progressing in a good way. It's stable. It's got its rights, checks and balances. You know that I'm going to micromanage through my seat, and making sure that you know it's a safe environment for all students that attend there.
Okay, I know around the country, and it's good that enrollment is going up. Around the country, I think colleges are having a problem, in that there's a demographic dip now. I know since I got this job, we've had 2 universities, private universities in Wisconsin fail, in part because of just lack of students, and somebody had to go under. When I look here, it looks like Kansas has over 20 universities that offer 4-year degrees of some nature, and given the well-documented problems here today, I wondered why would somebody go to Haskell? You know, when you don't have these concerns appearing in the paper, why do you think Haskell should, I guess, continue to exist, given we have so many other colleges in Kansas that don't have these problems?
Great question, sir. Very good question. You know, and I can only look at myself and potentially even my daughters. You know, one, it's a challenge. You know, some of us want to go away after college, right? We're this young kid, and we're going to move to the cities, and at least us, you know, rural families, you know, that come from the res and so forth. So one, it's a challenge. 2, for me, was, you know, it was because of my family. My mom and dad went there. My mom did, you know. So that's historic. It's tradition. Secondly is that you want to go to a place where you're safe. I know some of the colleges here in town that are historically black colleges, you know, I think there is a reason for that. I'm not obviously African American, but I think there's some culture things to that. Certainly same with us, you know, why we want to go to a tribal college or a place like Sapir Haskell, because it's a home away from home where you feel safe and you're around your Native American relatives. So that's the tradition. That for us is very, very important culturally. Secondly is just to get an education. And probably lastly is affordability. You know, when I grew up, you know, things were tough. You know, mom and dad, they worked hard like everybody else. But affording, especially in today's, and I'm sure you address that quite a bit, the cost in higher education, you know, it's skyrocketing. And
Well, how much is the average debt per graduate of Haskell?
I'm not sure about the debt, but roughly it's about $1,600 to $1,700 to attend the full year at Haskell, which is a you know, in today's age, it's phenomenal to get a full education with that.
How much is the total tuition for?
$1,600 to $1,700 per year.
16 to 7. That's very reasonable. I guess one measure of success of a university is how many kids graduate. I think they say within 6 years. Do you know of the kids who started Haskell, how many percentage-wise, how many graduate in 6 years?
Yeah, great question again on the data sets on that, sir. But you know, we looked at some in general since Haskell in its inception back in the day to where it's at now. We're roughly around, you know, 10 to 12,000 graduates since its inception back in the day.
I mean, percentage-wise, of the kids who, say, 6 years ago began at Haskell, how many get their degree within 6 years?
Oh, I see. I understand. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Yeah, the graduation rate on that, I would say, you know, I would estimate it's anywhere from 60 to, you know, 80% that graduate from that, who start and finish.
Okay.
I thank the gentleman whose time
Thank
has
you.
expired. The gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Hernandez, is now recognized. You, yeah, but, oh, no, how do these go? No. Come right up to this one right here.
All of yours are
The
broken?
blinking red. Oh, go up here. You can stay in my chair. Seriously, get up here.
They have better water in this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your generosity. It's definitely a different view from here. And now, as chair, do I have the authority of the chair so that I can decide a few matters? Thank you, Mr. Davis, for being here today. For many Native communities, education is inseparable from cultural survival. Tribal colleges and Indian country schools are not just places of learning, they are the heart of our communities, where language, tradition, and identity are nurtured and passed to the next generation. As we discuss educational policies, it is essential we recognize these institutions as vital stewards of culture and sovereignty. With that in mind, I'd like to ask, tribal colleges and schools often operate in rural or underserved areas where cultural traditions remain deeply rooted. How does the department plan to enhance support for these institutions to not only provide academic success, but also foster cultural continuity and community pride?
Great question, sir. I really echo your sentiments. You know, I look at our tribal colleges, again, because I came from one. My dad was a president for a number of years. They certainly are the heartbeat, they're the cornerstone of a lot of tribal communities, tribal nations across America. Very supported, ran very, very, they're ran and governed in a very stable way. I've always valued every tribal college president that I've worked with over the years. In fact, I'll have the privilege of speaking to a number of the tribal colleges here in the next month on some issues, but they always have my support. because I've told many of them when I retire, hopefully many years ago, I'm going to go back to a tribal college and teach, give back, whether it's teaching a government class or, mopping floors or cutting grass like Forrest Gump, I don't know, but I'm going to give back, and that's my goal when I retire, is to go back to a tribal college. I'm looking forward to that many years from now, though. But, make no doubt that tribal colleges, Haskell, SIPI, the colleges where I come from, are cornerstones for Indian country, because those are places. In fact, we were just out in Chief Dullknife College in Lame Deer here about a month or two ago. And again, you talk about the innovation of how they raised money, how they support local communities with jobs, and also the buy-in from local communities around there on teachers, and professionals that want to teach there. So, you have to have a strong heart, a very strong, good sense of your spirit to be a teacher. You got to really care on what you're doing with those tribal colleges. So I see that all the time with our tribal colleges across America. And working with you, with Congress, through our office, through our leadership together, I think we can continue to build together, a better and greater community for these tribal colleges across America.
Great, thank you. And universities and tribal colleges in Indian country are more than educational institutions. They are guardians of language, tradition, and cultural resilience. How does the Department of the Interior support these schools in fulfilling this vital role? And what further steps can be taken to strengthen their capacity as centers of cultural preservation?
Again, partnerships, honoring our treaties, honoring our sovereignties, as many of you are privy to, our treaties across every tribe. You're always going to hear that from me and from our tribal leaders, that honoring our treaties. And that one big one is education, providing the resources and funding, through administrations, through Congress, through various agencies, and how do we do that? How do we work together on those things? So I know you'll see a number of tribal college presidents that come through these hallways, they talk with you, they meet with you. But honoring those treaties through our land, water resources, ultimately honing and providing leadership experiences and avenues for up and coming leaders. I look at myself like never in my experience as a Haskell graduation that I'd be sitting here, in this position. I was, wanted to be a coach and teacher like my dad, simply. But for some reason I'm here doing the best I can. But I also look at the graduates that I've experienced over my time. Many of them are tribal leaders. They're tribal chairs. They're seated on council seats. Some of them are governors of their towns and cities. So you have a high level of leadership that comes out of these tribal colleges, including Haskell and SIPI, that are leading our Indian country in a better way. And we all face challenges, like I said, through history and time. But we have this resiliency of our people, this sense of a strong spirit, we as people in seeing these things through. So again, just looking forward to supporting tribal colleges. I always will, always have, and look forward to doing more.
Thank you, and I agree with the importance of honoring our treaties. I think it's important that the United States government and Congress do more to respect tribal nations' sovereignty, as well as the sovereignty, autonomy, and self-government of all U.S. territories, commonwealths, and free associated states. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Davis, thank you for being here today. I'd like to tell people a little bit about who I am first before I get to talking about things. This is my second term up here, starting my second term. And it has been stated multiple times that we've had a number of hearings on BIE and some of the things that we've seen going on in our Bureau of Indian Education. And I want to tell you what I've seen. I've seen a lot of failure, whether it be just in the school being dilapidated, whether the education is not there, or whether it's misconduct, criminal activity. It seems like we've seen the gamut of problems. But I've also seen success stories. You take like the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and how they have taken over a lot of their own destiny and how they're educating those kids and bringing them back into their culture. And it's exciting to see that. I'm a small businessman, and I've been in the private sector my entire career, really. And the way I look at things is pretty simple. I like to look at where we have successes and how do we replicate that through whatever we're looking at. And then if we have problems, what is the problem? What is the solution? And how do we make sure that that never happens again? And that's kind of where I want to focus today. Is, you can talk about money, but you can also talk about management and what you're seeing on that area. So back in 2018, OIG launched an investigation into SIPA over a manager at the school who had engaged in sexual misconduct and harassment. The results of the OIG's investigation found that neither SIPA or BIE had a policy prohibiting sexual relationships between faculty and students. Now, since this investigation, has BIE developed a policy prohibiting such relationships?
Yes, sir, they have.
Why was there no policy in place prohibiting sexual relationships between faculty and students?
Yeah, sir, great question again. Something that, I just shake my head at. I just don't understand why. I'm not, one to look in the past, too much, but, through my leadership, through my direction, these things are going to have already been, implemented or being worked on.
What protections are in place?
So we're looking at just working with our BIE staff, leadership, HR, all those processes of sexual harassment, background checks, making sure everybody's vetted, whether you're a school board member, your governance, your president, teacher, faculty, coach. All those things are being highly vetted and looking at those strong policies, making sure they're implemented.
I want to go to that real quick, the background checks. Last year when our committees met to discuss Haskell, former President Dr. Ronald Graham highlighted that Haskell failed to perform background checks, which saw 3 regents fail their tests and allowed a convicted felon to serve on the board. What steps has the department taken or is planning to take to ensure background checks are carried out?
Yeah, that's another concerning one for me that I just kind of shake my head at, sir. But again, though all those background checks, policies are being implemented as we speak.
All right, since you're doing that, I'm sure you're going to be able to keep Congress and this committee appraised of your progress on implementing that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia, the gentlelady, the ranking member from the Workforce Committee is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Davis, for your testimony. And let me say that I want to commend you for the successes that you've had. In 1965, Congress passed the Higher Education Act as part of Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty to expand higher education access to low and middle income students. And although more low-income students and Native students enroll in college now more than ever, the enrollment rates of these students still lag behind those of their peers. Our tribal colleges and universities, which have long served students who've had to overcome more than their fair share, historic disinvestment, generational trauma, and underfunded schools. These students don't just show up to learn, they show up to carry forward a legacy. And so let me start here. Mr. Davis, can you share with us what kind of impact completing a college degree has on students who attend tribal colleges and universities, and what about the impact on their families and the greater Native community?
Oh, Madam, that's a great question. Thank you for the history lesson too on that. Appreciate that. Impact, you're probably looking at one. I started out, I'm not a, bright student. I just worked hard. I was probably a B+ student, give or take. But, working hard and given the opportunity to excel in a space that was, for me, safe, that was culturally where I was surrounded by my relatives. And I always say relatives as in a country, we all consider ourselves relatives, whether you're Navajo or Tlingit or Seminole or, for my case, Lakota. But when you're in a good space like that, you're going to do well. And I felt that when I was at Haskell. I felt that when I was at home at Turtle Mountain Community College, community school. I felt that. And so in those areas, you succeed because you feel good about who you are. Compound that with cultural teachings, language, culture, all those things. We never had that early on. And those are the things my dad fought for as a superintendent, as an administrator, is that we can't continue to teach this old archaic way of math and science and reading and math, and we still do that, you know.
Yeah.
But to incorporate, you know, cultural languages was one reason why I succeeded, you know, in those adventures.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly can identify with that as a graduate twice of a historically black college and university that has some of similar issues in terms of infrastructure and so forth. But you made it clear why it's important for the federal government to invest in these schools. Can you share just briefly how the administration believes that the impact of TCUs would continue with a near 90% funding cut as the president requested in his budget?
Yeah, again, as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, you know, there are budget proposals out there. You know, again, those are things that obviously you as Congress members, you know, go through daily, entering your budget cycles and so forth too. And this is no different. You know, aside from what's being proposed, you know, in the current budget, tribal colleges, I know they're very active in I'll say maybe lobbying is the appropriate word here, as they, you know, ask for more funding. You know, that's always continued. My dad did years and years of that, you know, as a tribal college president. He spent a lot of time out here, you know, advocating for, you know, and showcasing, you know, the results, like the students, I think, that were behind me. You know, he'd bring a lot of the tribal college students here on showcasing their academic achievements. And again, you know, looking at those appropriations and keeping those funds going.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from students and presidents is clear. That TCUs are already being asked to do the impossible, and now we're telling them to continue to do that without heat, without roofs, and in some cases, without food on campuses. And in 2024, ProPublica released a damning report highlighting the failures of the federal government to fully fund tribal colleges and universities. And so the lack of financial hazards to address pipes bursting, ceilings falling, student cafeterias closing for entire semesters. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter this report into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
So, Mr. Davis, is there something that you've seen with Haskell or SIPI? What are some of their current infrastructure challenges?
Yeah, great question again, ma'am. I think, you know, for us as in the country, nothing's impossible. We just have to find you know, innovative ways to keep, you know, our funding sources available. And again, I did years of that. And yes, we got some federal funding. Yes, we got some state funding. Yes, we got some private funding. But, you know, we got to continue. That's just kind of how in the country is, you know. But I think sometimes being dependent sometimes on federal funding, it ebbs and flows. You know, we all know that. You as appropriators know that. There's some years where you get a lot of funding, some years you don't. That's nothing new to us. So looking forward of being more innovative and giving us the leverage to govern ourselves through our sovereignty models, I think is the best approach on that.
Well, thank you for your work and thank you for your commitment, and so we'll look forward to you addressing the long-standing infrastructure challenges of tribal colleges and the work that you're doing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Next, I recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Gosar and Owens, and thank you for holding this important joint hearing today and for allowing me to wave on to this committee. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for being here. I represent the big 1st District of Kansas, and while I do not serve on either of these committees, Haskell Indian Nations University is in my district. These concerns are serious, and it's imperative that Congress gets to work on much-needed improvements at both Haskell and SIPI. Established in 1884 by federal legislation aimed to fulfill the United States treaty and trust obligations to provide a high-quality education to American Indians, Haskell is the only tribal university in the country with an entirely indigenous population. As an alumnus, I know you know that full well. It is a one-of-a-kind, historic, and invaluable institution. However, and let me be clear, when it comes to Haskell, the U.S. Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Indian Education have repeatedly dropped the ball. Years of mismanagement, lack of oversight, and cycles of misconduct have all compounded and led us to yet another hearing. I look forward to hearing from you today on how President Trump and the administration plan on giving these issues the attention that has been lacking and providing solutions to finally right some of these wrongs. And Mr. Davis, thank you again for being here. Do you believe that the BIE can realistically handle post-secondary tribal education, given the lack of success in managing only 2 institutions?
Yeah, Congressman Mann, it's a great question. Thank you for your leadership as your membership as leadership in Congress for the district, including Lawrence and Haskell. Great question on how my office, operates our school systems. It's kind of twofolded. Some areas we do very well, and we do very well with the support from tribes, the local tribes. Tribal leadership's involved. In fact, we'd rather see tribes operate their own schools, self-governance and models. But in cases like Haskell and SIPI, it's a different, unique business model or a governance model in which it requires some oversight from the federal. Obviously, we haven't been doing a good job of that, and that's why one big reason why I came to this office when asked by Secretary Burgum is how do we figure out Haskell, how do we figure out these school systems?
From your experience working alongside tribes, how has providing opportunities for tribal communities to be in a greater position of authority over matters such as their education led to better outcomes for students?
That's another great question. That's a decision that tribal leaders that own and decide on whether or not they want to have their own tribal education systems. A lot of them do, like the tribal colleges. Some do partnerships with the state. Some do partnerships with the parochial schools, private schools, all the above. But it's given us a broader sense of school choice. I know school choice has been brought up a lot here in the last year or so. But over the years, we've been able to establish school choice through higher education and our school systems on reservations.
Is the department open to a possible legislative solution to help students at Haskell?
Absolutely.
Well, Mr. Davis, I just asked the last question because, and we discussed this before, but Senator Jerry Moran, also from Kansas, and I've been working on a legislative fix for Haskell. Our bill would transfer Haskell's governance from the BIE to a Haskell Board of Trustees, which would be formed through the legislation and consist of members nominated by the tribal communities. The university would be issued a charter and would still receive federal support. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I hope that we can work together in a bipartisan fashion with the Department of Interior on this legislation and really help Haskell to get to a better place and be everything that it can be. Haskell's in my district. When you pull up and walk around campus, you're there for 15 seconds and realize that this institution is not what it should be. And it should be a crown jewel. It is not a crown jewel today, but I believe with some changes, some very important changes for more autonomy, more self-governance, we can get this, what could be a crown jewel, to a much better place. We owe it to the students to do that, and I appreciate you being willing to be here today. And again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me wave on.
Thank the gentleman from Kansas. The gentleman from Guam, Mr. Malin, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Davis, the Bureau's 2022 A1B report really didn't do much there to show what's happening, good things happening. In fact, the investigation talked about the poor leadership, handling of sexual harassment, misconduct, bullying, and theft. So hopefully, I know there's some changes that have been made to Haskell as a result in the report. Talk about some of those changes that have been made.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you for the concern. Again, like I reiterated earlier, some of these reports I can't comment on. There are ongoing investigations, but again, I'm extremely upset. And I just think that with your help, with collaboration, we're going to turn this ship in the right direction. I'm very confident of that. If it requires me to micromanage from time to time, I'll definitely do that. Because it's twofold, for me to sit in this seat, but also alumni from there. I'm sure you, as members of Congress, you come from institutions, you graduated from wherever you came from, and if something was happening to your college, you probably would try to do something. I'm no different. So these are things that are kind of personal to me because of where I came from and where I graduated from and how personally invested I am with Haskell. So we're going to do all we can to make this right, and so we don't have to sit here again a year from now and talk about the same thing of the bad things that have happened.
And those bad things, and thank you for that, by the way, and those bad things that did happen, when reported by the students, the university really didn't take good care of the students and offering some care and support for those folks. So hopefully we can do something in their concern to make it a better life for them there. What levels of oversight will BIE exercise on Haskell now to ensure that the college is held responsible for failure to follow these basic policies?
Well, I think it always starts with leadership, sir. You know, leadership, governance. You know, I'm sure many of you in Congress sit on boards or been asked to serve on some type of capacity of leadership because of who you are, your experience, and we're no different. You know, making sure that I'm held accountable, making sure there's transparency, making sure that we're following, you know, regulations and laws, whether it's federal or tribal, what have you, however we're going to create this governance process, but making sure that we're accountable to our students, to those families that want to come there and get a good education. So that's our commitment.
I appreciate the commitment. Now we just got to build back the trust from these students in the aftermath of this report. So, and speaking of that, on the new interim president coming on in, your conversations with the president, how's he planning to address these breaches of trust outlined in the report?
Yeah, first of all, I think the outgoing president has another few weeks left, so he's not officially left yet. So the interim, I know Mr. Mackey Moore, who I talked with, just in general talking. I know he's alumni there, like myself. So again, you have another person that's, you know, personally invested into that college. I've heard really good things about Mr. Mackey Moore. I know we have a process that we have to go through. Some of these government processes, I'm getting used to them, learning them as I go, on how people are selected, how they apply, and so forth too. So, but I'm excited, you know, for that process to kickstart. And again, I'll be watching that process very closely, and making sure that we have a very strong president, either he or she, you know, that will be our next leader for Haskell in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I believe with your leadership and the new president coming on board, from this report, you can see where we can start and make all the improvements as possible. Please let us know how we can continue to help.
Absolutely. It's a reset. I think, again, as I stated before, you know, this is good timing. Unfortunately, why we got to meet here again, but I think if we reset our minds, you know, our collective leadership skills here, and really hone in on the changes, the good changes coming to Haskell, I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Gentleman from California, Mr. Connell, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Davis, we've heard that if Congress were to reduce the funding as the administration has proposed, tribal colleges would close. What is your response to that?
Yeah, great question. As I stated in my previous comments, you know, we've all been through fundings, dips and highs and lows. As I mentioned before, I worked for a tribal college for 8 years. I was a development officer. I was an adjunct instructor. My dad was a tribal college president. So this is nothing new to us, you know. So as we continue to work together through my office in this seat, looking at tribal college leaders, tribal leaders in general, you know, kind of lobbying you guys as they do every cycle. These are the things that I think we all look at. But contrary to that, I think we look at other ways of how we fund tribal colleges, whether it's state funding, which we did. Secretary and I, Burgum did a tremendous job of getting state dollars to tribal colleges. Also private funds, you know, foundations, and I think these are things that hopefully some of this legislation, this bill would open the doors for a foundation like Haskell and other areas for funding.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record this article entitled, "Trump Wants to Cut Tribal College Funding by Nearly 90%, Putting Them at Risk of Closing."
Without objection, so ordered.
So, Mr. Davis, you are an alum of Haskell Indian Nations University. You've also been an educator in BIE-funded high schools. But before I ask my question, I mean, 90% is a huge cut. I mean, do you not agree that this cuts of this magnitude would mean tribal colleges would close? many of them?
Well, again,
How can tribal college, I mean, what other revenue do they have besides the federal government?
yeah, again, great question. As I stated before, you know, these changes, ebbs and flows, and funding formulas throughout in the country is nothing new to us. You know, I've spent a lot of time in my first, 2 months.
Respect, isn't a 90% cut new? Have we ever had this kind of a cut before?
You know, like I said, I'm sorry to
Maybe
repeat.
that is new, is it not? A 90% cut is new.
Yeah, I'm just making sure you're done, sir.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, like I said, I've as a development officer, raising money for my college, my dad being a tribal college president, we've seen cuts for years. We've seen, increases, but I think that we as sovereign nations, tribal colleges.
Respectfully, Mr. Davis, is not a 90% cut new? Have we ever experienced this before?
That's a great question. I'm not certain on that. But
You're not certain, so your answer is you're not certain?
I'm not certain, yes. Sir.
Okay. And it would stand, I mean, would all of the colleges, or tribal colleges, survive a 90% cut? Wouldn't some of them just have to close?
I'm not certain on that, sir. It's a good question. I don't know the finances of every tribal college in America.
Okay, let's put it the other way. Can you say to this committee that every one of the colleges that now exist, the tribal colleges exist, that they would be unharmed, that they would all stay open?
I'm sure there'd be some direct impacts. I'm certain of that. But again, moving forward, in this time of resetting, funding formulas, looking at how governance models are used for tribal colleges, for in particular Haskell and SIPI, that's what I'm focused on today.
Well, which college, which colleges would be most likely to close first under this 90% cut?
Like I stated before, sir, I'm not privy to every tribal college's finances or budget situations.
Okay, well, I'm highly troubled by this proposed 90% cut. Well, I'm proud to represent Sherman Indian High School, which is a BIE-run school. Sherman and many other BIE schools struggle with staff recruitment and retention, and the reductions in force that the Trump administration has enacted would have worsened the problem by cutting dedicated staff at the schools and at the BIA. Can you describe the impact that inadequate staffing has on BIE's ability to conduct proper oversight of these schools?
Another great question, sir. Yeah. So the staff cuts, the deferred retirement plans, that they all have run their course. Fortunately, through my leadership and through, I'll say, providing education or orientation to how Indian education is ran throughout in the country, we're able to get a lot of those positions exempt or walked back, I'll say. So that's kind of where we're at through a lot of those educational systems. But places like where you come from Sherman Indian School, I'm familiar with that. I'll be visiting one in Riverside this Friday on their graduation efforts. But again, looking at collectively how can we work together through my office, through your seats, on sustainable funding and governance processes for these schools across in the country.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I ran over. I yield back.
You're up. Gentleman from Montana, Mr. Downing, is be recognized for his 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this important hearing, and thank you for allowing me to wave on. And Mr. Davis, thank you for being here. I represent Montana's 2nd District and came out of education, so something that I think about a lot. And student safety must be the foundation of any successful educational environment. Given the troubling history of criminal activity and mismanagement at Haskell, what steps is the department taking to improve crime prevention and campus security, both in terms of physical infrastructure and institutional accountability?
Great question, sir. Again, as I reiterated early on, this is a very concerning, very upsetting, very appalled, that these things have happened. But as we speak, I can assure you that these policies, procedures, the governance processes for these schools that under my leadership are all being addressed.
Thank you. Given the direct appropriations and federal operation of Haskell and the Southwest Indian Polytechnic Institute, transparency and stewardship of federal dollars is critical. Can you speak about what the department is doing to improve financial oversight?
Great question. From experience, when I would raise money, whether it's federal dollars or state dollars or private dollars, I made sure that as a development officer working for a tribal college that I was very on task with reporting mechanisms, your audits, on and on. So these things are at least through my control, are going to be very micromanaged moving forward.
So are new tracking or reporting systems being developed to avoid the kind of waste and abuse we've seen in the past?
Absolutely. Like I stated before, I haven't read every report. I think I've read enough to be concerned, but moving forward, all those things will be addressed.
So another topic, graduation rates at both Haskell and the Southwest Indian Polytechnic are a big concern, especially given the promise these schools hold for Native students. So what efforts are underway to boost student success, whether through academic support, program modernization, or partnerships with tribal communities?
Yeah, great question again, sir. I think it's all the above. As a parent with young, daughters who are in college and want to go to college, looking at those programs, workforce development. As most kids nowadays, if you have them, like I do, they change their mind, from week to week, that one day they want to be a business owner, or another one they want to be a teacher. So making sure, and the tribal colleges do a great job of providing, a flexibility of array of degree programs offered to students across the country.
Thank you. Have you heard from tribal leaders or students about deteriorating campus facilities?
Yeah, that's always a question. Even when I was working as a development officer, I'll use an example of our gymnasium. It was built when I was a kid, when my dad was there as a dean of students. That gym's still there. Could it be used for another bigger gym? Yeah, absolutely. So those are priorities of capital campaigns that are being worked on, whether it's federal dollars, private dollars, or other funding mechanisms.
I appreciate that, because I know that BIE operates on a pretty tight budget, and I just want to understand what can be done in the short term to address what I see as urgent maintenance and housing concerns. Under the Great American Outdoors Act, the Legacy Restoration Fund was created to address deferred maintenance across federal facilities. Now, given the well-documented infrastructural challenges at both Haskell and Southwest Indian Polytechnic, why has the BIE not selected either of these institutions for any LRF-funded projects to date?
That's another great question. I don't know the answer to that, but looking in how the Great American Outdoor Act, which is, I still scratch my head how that funds tribal colleges. When I think of outdoors, I'm thinking of forests and outdoors, lakes and streams and stuff, and how that pertains to tribal college. I'm not certain on that, but if that's a way how you as Congress funds that, great. But other ways, what other ways or what other acts can we look at to provide sustainable funding for tribal colleges? I would respectfully urge you to look at that as well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you being here. Appreciate your responses. Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to wave on, and on that I yield back.
Gentleman is recognized. Thank you very much. And now the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Randall, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Davis, for your testimony. As my colleague here said, BIE already operates on a pretty tight budget. And, you just mentioned now looking for additional potential acts for additional revenue, sustainable revenue. And I'm wondering if you think that you can keep the commitment that you have made, and I know that you are strongly in support of addressing the issues at Haskell to make that institution so much better and to rise to the expectations. Can you do that while also facing a 90% cut to the budget for schools that's in the president's budget proposal?
Yeah, like I stated before, ma'am, those are great questions, and I really thank you for your concern on that. But this, as I stated before, this is nothing new in the country. As a former development officer, adjunct instructor, raising money, we've seen the dips and the highs and lows of funding, for a long time. My dad being a college president for 12 years, I worked hand in hand with him on a lot of those things. So, but we feel confident, that some of these fundings will be restored in some way, mechanism, because tribal college presidents, tribal leaders do a great job, of working the Hill, doing their thing, as you probably see them in the hallways every week. They're very excellent at that. They're very professional at what they do. So, but it's one thing to give $1 for obvious reasons, but also looking at, what's the return on those dollars. When you look at the graduates, even utilizing myself, obviously I graduated a long time ago, but I think there's a little bit of success in some of that. I think I've tried my best to be something in my life, and maybe be an example to somebody, because I've had that growing up. My mentors, who went to tribal colleges, or some only made it to 8th grade. Those are my mentors. Some had degrees. My dad got his doctorate degree, through some help through programming, federal programming, at Penn State University. So these are the things I'm well aware, but sometimes you have to mold and shape and be innovative on how we fund our schools across America.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Davis, for that answer. I've watched, the tribal leaders in my district do more with less time and again. I worry, though, that is not living up to our treaty obligation to ask tribal nations over and over and over again to do more with less. I also am a fellow university development officer and a former chair of the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee in the Washington State Senate, and know that we have very, very, very low admission rates and retention rates and graduation rates for Native American students across the country. And there are a lot of things that many states around the country, as well as many Indian colleges, have been doing to try and increase those numbers. What I have found in my experience is that sometimes the hardest to reach students are also the most expensive to reach and support, because the things that work for every other student don't always work for the students that we're not already reaching. So, facing a 90% cut to the budget as suggested in the president's budget proposal tells me that there's not the investment in those students that they deserve. And I wonder, what you think a 90% cut says to Native students who are considering college. You mentioned your family's story. You have, you and your father have both done incredible work. You mentioned that your dad was able to complete his degree because of federal funding at his graduate institution. And as we are seeing funds cut over and over and over again, not only at the Department of Indian Education, but also the Department of Education broadly, what message does that send to students who are worried about whether or not college is for them?
Well, like I stated before, ma'am, it's nothing new. We've been through the ebbs and flows of funding with Congress for a long time, and I've talked to a lot of older leaders, college presidents who retired. We become innovative. We're resilient. We find ways, and we always will find ways to provide that funding mechanism, whether it's working the Hill, through our leadership, working through my office, working directly with you as in support of each other on how we find, long-term funding mechanisms, formulas for areas. I even refer to this, the Great American Outdoor Act. I never knew that was out there for funding. Again, encouraging you as Congress to look at other acts that are out there possibly for long-term funding. So again, I think we just, like we always do in the country, we put our nose to the grindstone, and we just work hard, and we put that in prayer, and we produce good outcomes. So these are just the continued ways how we conduct educational systems in the country. So I look forward to continue that, working that, doing everything I can within my power, within my seat to do that, and I hope you would urge you to do the same.
Thank you.
I think the
Thank you, Mr.
gentlelady,
Chair.
the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Fine, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate us having this hearing today. Long time ago, before I got into politics, I worked with over 100 tribes in my life, with a different business that involved the pulling of levers and the clinking of coins. So, I've had the privilege of visiting many Indian nations around the country and most of the states where they exist and seeing some of the unique challenges that they have. And so it's an issue that's important to me, and I was proud to be able to help some of our tribes create more economic self-sufficiency through that. But I do have some questions. I didn't know, frankly, about that these institutions even existed until I started to prepare for this hearing. I just got elected to Congress a couple of months ago. And my question as I read all of this, and my question is, why do you think the Biden administration cared so little about these Indian students that it didn't actually take action? Because it seems like there's clearly been problems at these institutions for a long time. Just why didn't they care about these Indian students?
Great question, sir. I don't know. I came on board here, on March 13th, asked by Secretary Burgum, my former boss as governor, and one of the questions we first had in our exchange was, how do we look at education systems, in particular BIE, knowing that some of these, I didn't know at the time that some of these reports were out, but now I know what I know. Again, we're here, very concerned and so forth, but I can't answer the question of what the previous administrations did years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I can only control what's in my space, and my commitment to my people and my relatives is how do we provide a safe educational environment for good outcomes and graduation levels for students across the Indian country.
Well, I just ask, moving forward, you can't fix problems in the future if you don't know why they happened in the past. An interesting look into why it just didn't matter to the folks there to try to solve this problem. I've a question, though, about solutions. I looked up the budget of the Institute of Haskell. It's about, I think the president's asked for $22 million. I did the basic math, 700 students. That's about $32,000 a year for a student. If they graduate in 4 years, it's $120,000. So that's a substantial amount of money. And I sometimes think outside the box. Mm-hmm. Would we be better off, I'm just interested in your perspective, in taking 700 students coming from reservations and saying, look, here's $120,000 to go to any college that you want in the United States. I mean, we can try to fix all of these problems, or we can just say, here's a scholarship, take it to the University of Kansas or the University in Florida. It's certainly a lot less than $120,000 to get a degree at the University of Florida, which is near where I represent. Have you thought about alternatives to just, should the government be in the university business, or would we be better off taking the money and giving students choice in where to take it?
Yeah, I appreciate how you think outside the box, because that's exactly what tribal colleges and tribal nations do. Some, maybe where you come from in Florida, some have tribes that have maybe a little bit more through, obviously, maybe gaming. That sounds like where you came from. Yeah. So, that's the value of those industries that provide scholarships. Back when I went to college, my tribe did have scholarship funds. They still do have scholarship funds for higher ed. So we take advantage of that. So I have what we call, or what you call, school choice. I have a scholarship, I have some funding that I can go to a private school or a state university, or I can go home to a tribal college. So those models exist as we speak. So that's the value, again, of our tribes being innovative or thinking outside the box, of wanting our students to go off the reservation, off the tribal lands to attend a university. So those models certainly exist.
Great. Well, I look forward to exploring those with you. My focus is not for the benefit of an institution. My focus is on the benefit of the students, because these 700 students, if they are getting a problem education, which it sounds like they were based on what I've read, we're not only spending a lot of money, but we're not giving these kids what they need to be successful in life. And so that should be our focus, not how do we preserve institutions, but how do we better the life of our children. So I thank you for the work that you're doing. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Florida. You led to my ideas. So, but the ranking member has a couple of questions, and then I'll finish it up. Okay, so ranking member.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence here. And thank you, Mr. Davis. Clearly, your leadership, your dedication, your heart are all in the success of these institutions and our tribal students. Creative ways to fund schools, prayer, independence, innovation, those are important. But I will state once again, the U.S. government has made treaty commitments to our tribal communities, support the education of our indigenous students. And I feel strongly that we are failing to deliver on that promise if we are cutting a budget that is already anemic by 90%. Do you have available alternative tools to what you've talked about with alternative funding streams? Like, what else are you thinking about doing to help the success of these students? I very much appreciate Ranking Member Adams's points that you supported, that the school environment and how people feel when they're in that school environment does impact their success. So what other options do you have? And I will just ask you to be rather succinct because I have one other question for you.
Another great question, ma'am, another great comment. You know, looking at, you know, this pending legislative bill, like I said, I haven't read it yet, but allowing tribes, or excuse me, like Haskell to be more innovative. I think what I've looked at sometimes in the governance of some of our school systems, they're really constrained. A lot of red tape, you know, a lot of rules and regs. And how can you fundamentally, you know, teach in an effective way? How can you build out better budgets? How can you allow other funding mechanisms to be, you know, sourced into that school system? So those are things we really want to look into, of how more sovereignty is given to these schools, as is the case here too. And the governance structure, I think that's in key. You know, I'm a big believer in self-governance. I just am. You know, I was taught that from my father. Versus a government-run institution. I think those are things that are really being seriously looked at across Indian country. So those are just examples of how I would look at, you know, different ways of doing that.
So what I'm not hearing is closing the schools and sending your students to another place with voucher-like programs. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair question. Something that we've heard loud and clear from Indian country, you know, through comments in my visits, is that, you know, our schools are sacred. You know, our children are sacred. So, are schools perfect? No. You know, is schools across America perfect? No, they're not. There's always room for improvement with data sets, outcomes, graduation rates, funding. You know, we can go on and on about these systems across America.
No, thank you. And I will just say what I think is obvious. You are in an impossible situation here. You clearly deeply care about these institutions, and yet we are almost eliminating the budget. So we cannot expect miracles here. And even with optimized management, governance, all these things, I believe we need to support you and your leadership. And I've heard across the aisle here a commitment to doing that. I look forward to our working together with you to live up to our tribal obligations, our treaty obligations, and making sure that these learning environments are actually meaningful and supportive and restorative for these students who deserve a future. You sitting here before us is very inspiring. We want other students from our Indigenous communities to be here leading and making sure that there's a vibrant and successful future for our tribes. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from North Carolina is given 2 minutes for her second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Davis. I'm sorry that Mr. Fine left. He said he'd only been here for a short time, but I wanted to just share with him and the committee that under President Biden, it's a little disingenuous to say that the former president didn't do anything, but he did. The TCUs did receive $367.3 million in addition to the funds that they received through COVID. So we have been supporting, the prior administration has been supporting, and I do chair the bipartisan HBCU caucus with Representative French Hill, and we have some co-chairs on the Senate side as well, so I'm very interested in these schools. But I don't think we can continue to underfund and overlook these institutions and then turn around and say that we care about equity in higher education. And I know for some people they think equity is a bad word. I think it's a good word. But it doesn't add up. 30% of TCU students report facing food insecurity. These students are working hard every single day to break the cycles of poverty with empty stomachs. And I'm trying to understand, Mr. Davis, your position and the authority that you have, and I wanted to ask if you're willing to offer suggestions to your superior. You know, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. And we've continued to ask about the 90% and whether you want to admit that or not. And I don't know, maybe it has to do with the administration that you're in. But 90%, that means that's just about all of your budget. And I was a college professor for 40 years, an administrator as well, and I understand the difficulties and the challenges that you have trying to run these schools. You did say that you didn't know about the other schools, but I would just suggest that you have a conversation with whoever your superior is or whoever who's reporting to you, to offer some suggestions about at least talking with other chancellors and presidents of these schools. So since we're talking about the legacy and so forth, that I think that would help you at least get a broader perspective, and maybe you can answer a little more directly some of the questions that have been asked, because I don't think you have, and I hopefully you're just not in a position where you just don't think you can say what you really feel. And I can't say what you feel, but I can tell you what I know. If you take 90% out of anybody's salary, you only have 10%. You can't run a school like that. And certainly I hope that you are not thinking about closing. I think these schools must survive. Education is power, knowledge is power, and that's what makes the difference in lives and communities. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Davis, I'll turn to my questions. Now, are you familiar with a college by the name of Embry-Riddle?
Say that again, sir. I'm sorry.
Are you familiar with a college named Embry-Riddle? They're a big aviation school.
Aviation school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bring it up because they march to a different drummer, okay? They take no federal funds. They're all private, okay? And why I'm bringing that up is they've become one of the top aviation schools in the world. In fact, as far as fighter or as pilots go, they're either 1, 2, or 3, and they're 2 of the 3 because they have 2 campuses, one in Daytona, Florida, and one in Prescott, Arizona. Okay. Now, one of the other things I'm going to bring up to you is a little story. And why I'm going to tell the story is because somebody was dreaming, and I want you to dream after this with me. Okay. So Wyoming, I'm from Wyoming originally. Could not keep doctors and dentists, health professionals. Mm-hmm. So they had minerals and they had excise tax on it. Yep. And they hired some consultants to help build them some buildings, dental buildings and some medical buildings. But instead of doing that, the consultant said, don't build dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs were actually the buildings, okay? They said, allow your students to go wherever they may, and then once they get in, help them out. So, for example, my sister went to medical school at the University of Utah. They paid their whole way. They paid their whole way through and gave her a $20,000 stipend to live off of. For every year she did that, she had to come back. Okay? So it was very well planned out. Very interesting. Okay? Wouldn't you say? Now, what I'm going to ask you now is, dream. If you look at Haskell, this is a perfect time for changing of direction. I think the gentleman from North Carolina said it. I think Mr. Fine said it from Florida, and I think the ranking member said it. Okay? So close your eyes and tell me what you see Haskell looking like. What do you see?
I see a brand new campus. I see my stadium, which broke my heart as a runner there, the iconic stadium there, a veteran cemetery, by the way. A veteran stadium, by the way, dilapidated. The track had, weeds and, just the bleachers were, everything was closed. It made me cry. It hurt. So when I think scenes like that, my mom's, dormitory, my dormitory, all these things that really need to be upgraded. I see that, but I also see, more importantly, students that are walking around happy, secure, safe, energized, vibrant, culturally happy, honed in on their cultural and their language. That's what I see. That's my dream for Haskell and all schools across the country, is that these models have to fit us, whether it's a Lakota college or a Anishinaabe or a Navajo. These things are very, very personal to us because of the nature of how we teach and because, prior to that, and we know the stories of boarding schools. We all know the history. You know, we've been through that process a lot, the horrific stories of boarding schools. But we today, as now, sitting here in front of you with your leadership, we all have a collective opportunity here, committee members, to do something different, to really work together, to brainstorm, to dream of what our schools could be like, to be better, to be safe. You know, that's our dream, and I hope you would open your eyes and your hearts and to look at that model. Work with us, work with me, and I promise you I'll work with our tribal leaders, our tribal college presidents to see what that looks like. You know, that's my commitment. So I think this is a perfect time right now to reset that button of what this really looks like for the future of education across Indian country. I really do. That's my dream.
So I see something in the middle here that really is a problem for both sides, both from the U.S. side and from the Native American side. And it's the word sovereignty, okay? You have to have a defined definition here. You can't be sovereign on this and then just say, no, we're not sovereign on that. It doesn't work that way. And I think you're caught in the middle because of a government. We're afraid to talk about this conversation. I think we have to define that first. That's my biggest key. Number two is then we have to get you back to dreaming. I would look at least from my view, seeing what I've seen here from the problems that are at Haskell, I would think the first thing I would want to try to do is try to get housing. There's lots of different ways to go housing, and I would actually probably leverage that, okay? And why I say that is I watched a 24-unit hotel being put up in 2 weeks. At 4 weeks, they actually had guests. They were pre-made up in Las Vegas. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. I sat there and filmed it, and I shouldn't have been filming it because I was supposed to be somewhere else. But that's how amazing this is. And I think if you start with a home base where kids feel safe, they have units that they're comfortable in, you can make anything work. Okay? The opportunities that you have, I think, are so great. But I think you have to have that vision first. You put that vision down, and the gentlelady from North Carolina said it. If you don't plan, then you're going to plan to fail. And I think we're just rolling over and over and over again, and we're not addressing the situation properly. That make sense?
I agree. You know, when you talk about sovereignty, you know, sovereignty begins with yourself. And how that begins is through education. So I became self-sovereign through education. Through my degree at Haskell, that's how I became self-sovereign, where now I don't have to really depend on federal aid or somebody. Do I need a hand up at times? Absolutely, we all do. We all need to do that. But through my education, through my degree, through this piece of paper that we get when we graduate, that's sovereign to me. And I've shared that many times, thousands of times with a lot of the students that I've mentored over the years. Having that self-sovereignty, now you understand what it means to have your own, you can call your own shots. You're in control of your destination. How does that translate to in the country with the parallel of our treaties? That's where it gets a little complicated. You know, are we self-sovereign? Yes, we are. Does Congress adhere to our tribal treaties? Yes or no? You know, it just depends, you know, so it gets complex, right? But for me, you know, and while we're sitting here, the key to sovereignty, the key to self-sovereignty is education. You're obviously very self-sovereign as leaders. You're educated, you're elected, you know, you control your destiny. And do you need help at times? Absolutely, we all do. You know, we all need that from time to time. Do we face challenges? Yes, we do. But we help each other. That's what Indian Country does. That's what Indian Country's done for me. It's always supporting me. I support them back. Same from the communities, the districts you come from. You see families that need help. You see families that are doing well. You know, we all live in that space. But how do you blend that together? How do you share some of these resources, you know, across where you live? These are things that you all face as leaders. I'm no different. But at the end of the day, we have to create a space, that environment, through education, like Haskell, like SIPI, and these other education institutions, to have that freedom to be self-sovereign. So again, I'm really looking forward to working with you. I hope to come back to this committee and bring better news, better outcomes, and I'm very confident we will.
Well, we're oversight, so expect to be given an invitation. The gentlewoman from Arizona is going to go, and then I'll finish out with our final comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank our witness for being here today. The Bureau of Indian Education School System is a critical institution that provides education for roughly 46,000 students at 183 schools across the United States. These schools are essential to supporting Native youth and upholding tribal sovereignty. Unfortunately, chronic staffing shortages and inadequate funding have left many BIE schools in disrepair, putting the health and safety of students at risk. All students have a right to safe and healthy classrooms, and we must ensure that these rights are extended to Native students. However, instead of addressing the decades of deferred maintenance and repair backlog that have weakened educational outcomes for Native students, this administration wants to make extreme cuts to BIE staffing and funding. We've already seen that DOGE has targeted Haskell and Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute with drastic staff reductions, which, according to the Native American Rights Fund, devastated operations at Haskell and SIPI and undermined BIE operated schools across the nation. And now the administration wants to cut funding for BIE post-secondary programs by almost 90%. This would include critical funding for facilities management and infrastructure improvement across BIE. Despite what this administration may think, slashing funds and dismantling critical government agencies is not the way to support Haskell students. The federal government has a legal and a moral obligation to uphold tribal sovereignty in education. That means fully funding tribal schools and colleges, not abandoning them. Mr. Davis, does the federal government have a trust obligation to ensure that Haskell and SIPI continue to exist to serve Native students?
Yes, we do.
And would that trust responsibility continue if Haskell and SIPI were taken out of the BIE?
Reframe the question, ma'am, sorry.
Would, even if they were taken out, would we expect that trust responsibility to continue?
I'm not sure the question on taken out.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't understand that.
Could you expand then, I'll try this reframing, could you expand on how Haskell and SIPI would continue to serve Indian students and uphold that trust responsibility if they were to incur the administration's 90% in cuts?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, I understand. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, like I stated before, ma'am, before you came, the cuts throughout in the country through my tenure doing this almost 20 years now, we've seen cuts, we've seen increases, we've seen it all, but we've always been resilient. We've always been prepared for these cuts, challenges. We're very resilient, like I said, being innovative, and I think that's the value of this setting today, is how do we collectively look at long-term sustainable funding mechanisms for in the country, in particular higher education institutions and our K through 12 schools.
While I, of course, appreciate your commitment to resilience and the fact that you've been proactively preparing for this, Mr. Davis, I believe that Haskell, SIPI, and any college would be unable to serve their students after a 90% budget cut, and it would result in us absolutely failing Native students. I will intend to pursue language in any bill that changes the administration of Haskell and SIPI. This language would clarify that adequate funding is necessary to meet the federal government's trust responsibility to tribes and the Native American community. I will submit that language to the department for your review. Can you think of any reason, Mr. Davis, that the Department of Interior or BIE would not support such language?
Well, we'll certainly support what's mandated for us, but looking at Representative Mann's bill that's being introduced here, I think today, or I'm not sure when it is, I think that's certainly an opportunity for your body to really look at, not just with Haskell, maybe other institutions, of what that funding mechanism would look like.
Okay.
So I think there's a great opportunity here again with your your leadership here and with the proposed bill that's being introduced here. So look forward to working with on that.
Thank you. And you already know well the DOJ cuts have already hit faculty and staff very hard. What is the department doing right now to ensure that there are enough faculty and staff to provide a world-class education to Indian students at Haskell?
Yeah, fortunately, when those things are happening, you know, I personally asked for exemptions, and we got that. And now we're looking at other jobs that are opening. So I know a number of our institutions that received those employee cuts are being advertised. So that's exciting on those fronts too. So we're getting back some of those employees who wish to come back. But other jobs are out there as well for our institutions as we speak.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time, so I'll yield back. Thank you so much.
I think the gentlelady, just a couple more questions, Mr. Davis, and you've been so gracious with your time and your answers. Treaty is an obligation from both sides, right? Is that true?
Well, it depends, you know. I think I can only speak for my treaty, where I come from, the Fort Laramie Treaty. You know, obviously our large millions and millions of acres were given up, you know, with those promises.
Oh, I get that. But my point is, a treaty is two people coming to an agreement, right?
Yeah.
And trust is a series of promises kept. I've always said that, okay? So in a treaty, both sides have to keep their word. Both, okay? So there's a lot of mistrust right now. Because I see the federal government not doing their job. I see some of the tribes not doing their job. I'll give you one of them, okay? In Arizona, we allowed for Indian gaming. It came to Arizona, the state took it up as a proposition initiative, we're an initiative state, and we passed it. Now, part of the supposition of that group was that no new casinos would come about in Phoenix proper. What happened is, there was one of the tribes, the Tohono O'odham, who actually were doing it. They signed, said they would do nothing, but they engaged with a middleman. They did it behind closed doors. Now, what ended up happening is that we caught them. They got caught. I had all their minutes of their tribal councils. I had everything. But then they went to court and they said, oh, we're sovereign immunity. Okay? So, once again, there's mistrust on both sides. And that's why I really wanted you to try to dream a little bit. You're not going to throw money away, right? If something's going wrong, it would be stupid to throw money away, wouldn't it? Would you agree?
Well, you know, it's a great question, great comment. State by state, tribe by tribe, everything's different. You know, you referenced Arizona, you referenced Wyoming, where I come from, the Dakotas. You know, we're all same but different. You know, how legislative bodies, you know, do business with the tribes, that's their preview. No different where I come from. You know, I did 2 gaming compacts during my tenure with 2 governors, you know, and that was just the good old song and dance of a deal, right? Through federal policy that's allowable between states and tribes. So there's many examples out there, as you know, Mr. Chairman, of how tribes and states, the federal government work together or they don't work together. That involves treaties. I mean, that's the everlasting process that I learned back in the 90s when I was real young. I'm in it now. I'm in it today to day. These things get complex, but the best way to navigate through these things is having these venues to talk about it. You know, I've engaged with a number of tribes, you know, leadership, engagement. That was a big commitment why I came on with Secretary Burgum, was because of his leadership, because of his value of listening, following through. Is everything perfect? Are we ever going to get what we want? You know that. As you debate, you know, a lot of your bills throughout the Congress, you know, and as a common citizen, that frustrates us, you know, but it's part of governance. You know, it's part of America. It's part of any country, you know, but we as leaders do the best we can, the best interests of any country and your constituents. But it certainly has its moments.
Yeah.
And so the things that you reference certainly have its moments.
So, last point. National Congress of American Indians. That means annually, right? Wouldn't this be a perfect storm for them to be involved with
the federal government, along with Haskell University and SIPI?
Yeah, certainly. You know, NCI has been around a long time. I just spoke with them a couple weeks back up in Connecticut, had very positive engagement. You know, they're all concerned. But you also have other organizations like Coalition of Large Land Bases. You know, they're very up and coming. They're very strong. You have other associations, Midwest Tribes of in the country. You have other alliances down in the Southwest, down in Oklahoma, other alliances. So you have a number of very strong leaders in the country that have their associations. Even one up in the affiliated tribes up in the Spokane area. I was just up there. You know, that's a huge fishing and river systems up there too. That is very, very unique and powerful up there too. So all these associations have a vested interest in the country, obviously education, whether it's your tribal colleges or schools at home, but in this case, Haskell as well. So,
Well, I got to tell you, thank you so very much. Your time is invaluable. I want to thank the witness for his valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for you, and we ask that you will respond to these in writing. Under House Natural Resources Committee Rule 3, members must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, June 27th. Hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business,